For news 24 hours a day, go to CBSNews.com.
We have been listening to President Obama in a special report by CBS News, a very emotional President Obama there, as he talked about Sandy Hook a few different times. He unveiled his executive action and what he wants to do about gun control. I'm Meg Oliver.
I'm Vladimir Duterte. Thanks for joining us. We have also with us Caitlin Huey-Burns, who joins us from Real Clear Politics to talk about the proposed steps, the proposed executive action that President Obama is suggesting to go around the Congress of the United States. The president wants to increase background checks and make it tougher to exploit some of those gun show loopholes that so many have exploited in the past. He wants to make communities safer, and by doing that, adding 200 ATF agents to the rolls already, expand mental health, and improve gun technology. But as our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, said, this is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be challenged in the courts.
Right, and he's already received pushback from Congress before he even announced these proposals. And we saw with the immigration executive actions, as Jan mentioned as well, that Speaker Boehner at the time, the Speaker at the time, pushed for a court order on those as well. And we're still seeing that on the campaign trail as Republicans are vying for the White House. We're seeing them yesterday and today and throughout the week continue to push back against these proposals and say that they would repeal them, and so it is certainly a divisive issue in the country and on the presidential campaign trail.
We want to bring in our CBS News legal correspondent Jan Crawford, who is on the North Lawn of the White House. Jan, why didn't President Obama do this a few years ago when he was so upset after Sandy Hook?
Well, I mean, he tried. I mean, they introduced legislation that failed in Congress, of course. And so, you know, senior aides say he really believes before he leaves office, he wants to try to do something. I mean, you heard him in the speech saying that this is not going to solve everything. This is not going to end all mass violence. But if it can save one life, and not just mass violence, he talked very movingly about, you know, high school kids who are slain on the streets of Tennessee or in Chicago. So he is hoping to essentially save a life with this, and he feels that he wants to do it before he gets out of office. The question is whether he's really waited too long, because if there are these expected challenges, if lawsuits are filed, which everyone says is very likely, that could keep some of this tied up in court through the end of his administration, which means that they may not take effect unless the next president decides to pick up the ball and run with it.
Jan, when you look at the polling across the country, a CBS News New York Times poll from December 4th says 51% of Americans think gun control, gun laws should be stricter. That's down, though, from 58% back in October. There's a CNN ORC poll that says that 48% of Americans favor stricter gun control, 51% oppose. So we're looking at, you know, if you look at these numbers all taken together, you know, the country is more or less equally divided. And is the president making a case that those who do support stricter gun control should make those voices heard at the ballot box? But he is facing an uphill challenge, is he?
Well, yes and no, Vlad. I mean, I think when you look at the overall question of do you support gun control, it is divided, and we saw in the speech the very emotional, passionate president of the United States essentially injecting that into the campaign and telling people if you don't like these efforts to block gun control, then go to the ballot box and vote these people out. So yeah, if you look at the general question, but when you get into some of the more specifics, and that really was what the president was trying to do with this speech, background checks, for example. Most people support these. Republicans, voters support these. Gun owners support these. So you heard over and over the president saying, you know, these are common sense restrictions. People support them. Really trying to kind of build this, you know, coalition of support across party lines. But I think at the end, he really injected it and made it more partisan by saying that, you know, look, we know that you know, if you really want real change, go to the ballot box.
Jan, I want to ask you, we're running some tweets now on the bottom of our screen there, and there was just one that I saw from Senator Marco Rubio, who's obviously running for the presidency of the United States, and he says that he intends to reverse any executive action that President Obama takes. He calls it unconstitutional. As a lawyer, are these executive actions unconstitutional?
Well, I think that much of what the president has proposed is really kind of permissible under most of the Constitution. So, you know, but you're going to still have a legal fight. There's two separate arguments. There's a Second Amendment argument, or the right to keep and bear arms. The president, I thought, pretty powerfully made the case that this is a reasonable restriction with an urgent need for, just like we allow reasonable restrictions that are important under the First Amendment, right to free speech. You can't yell fire in the crowded theater. So I thought, he kind of addressed a lot of the Second Amendment questions that are pretty pressing. And a lot of this is just tweaking the existing law. But, there's this other separate constitutional argument, kind of the separation of powers, if you will, issue, whether or not he's gone too far here on some of these proposals, whether this is something that Congress should really have taken care of. The president insists that he does have the executive authority to do this. His lawyers have cleared it. They've been very careful in what they're proposing, trying to walk this line by pushing the limits of his power without, going too far and making it unconstitutional. But that is going to be decided, assuming that these lawsuits are filed, by judges who are not going to be swayed by, passionate arguments or tears of concern by a president, but looking at the law. And that is something that takes time. So, this could not be resolved by the end of his administration.
So what's the reality, Jan, that any of this would actually take effect?
Well, some of this is already going to take effect. There are rule changes that can be done, additional staffers who can be brought in. But some of the bigger proposals, the background checks, the gun show dealers, the internet, those can be challenged. His request to Congress, he wants more money to hire ATF agents and ATF investigators, 200 more. He wants $500 million to increase access to mental health treatment. That's really, I think, going to be a hard sell in Congress, coming at the end of an election year with him leaving office. So, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. Some of the stuff he can do right away, and I think will take effect, but other things are going to be challenged.
We keep hearing about, the other GOP presidential candidates saying that if he does this, they will come in and they will, with a stroke of a pen, they will erase all of this. So let's say some of these things do take effect and he hires more than 200 ATF agents. What's the financial cost here that we're looking at in terms of what a waste that could be?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily fire them. You could reallocate them elsewhere. And obviously, by design, the way our system is set up, the president has a lot of leeway in how he wants to run these executive, federal agencies. So the next president comes in could say, well, I see it differently. So presidents have quite a lot of power, executive power, to kind of tinker with and execute, that's just the words of the Constitution, faithfully execute existing laws. But, a Republican president, as we've already seen, they see some of these issues, probably not all, but some of these issues differently. So just as the president is stroking his pen to, with the stroke of a pen, putting this into effect, or trying to, the next president could just as easily sign it away.
All right, Jan Crawford on the North Lawn of the White House. Jan, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it.
Sure.
We're still here with Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is joining us to discuss the president's plans to take this executive action. And as Jan just mentioned, Caitlin, the president does face an uphill battle with these challenges that will most likely happen in court. And we're in an election season, so all the Republican candidates, we've been running those tweets at the bottom of the page, and even before the president came out today, they were already talking about what they plan to do, which is for the most part to do away with what the president has said he's trying to do now.
Sure, and I actually think it will be something of a galvanizing force on the Republican side, a mobilizing force to turn out for these primaries and caucuses and eventually for the general election. We've talked about how this really breaks down, the country is split, but really on partisan lines, and so that's why you're seeing so many of these candidates really push back against it. But on the Democratic side, you're seeing a lot of support for these kinds of measures. Hillary Clinton has pushed for stricter gun measures, specifically on background checks. Even Bernie Sanders, who comes from Vermont and is a pro-gun state and a pro-gun senator, has also called for some changes as well. So on the Democratic side of the presidential race, it's very different.
Well, Vlad was talking about different polls that came out earlier, and he mentioned the Quinnipiac poll that shows that 47% of Americans support stricter gun laws, 50% oppose it. The president said during his speech that when did this become a partisan issue? I want to present that question to you as we listen to the candidates debate this.
Sure. I think it was remarkable. I followed that 2013 bill in the Senate right after the Sandy Hook shooting, and you did see lawmakers really struggle with this decision. They struggled with the issue after a member of Congress, Gabby Giffords, who was featured earlier, was shot. But the way that these districts are cut, the way that they're structured, the constituencies there just really is not that appetite within the Republican Party in these specific districts that would influence whether or not these members of Congress keep their jobs. So I think that's what the real issue in Congress is at this point. And it was interesting to hear the president, admit that this is not going to happen in this Congress. It's not going to happen in his presidency. You also, on the flip side, during that vote, you had several Democratic lawmakers from southern states struggle with this idea as well. So at the time, it wasn't, cut and dry across party lines. You did have a majority of Republicans opposed, but you also had some Democrats struggle with this and the handful vote against it.
We have a soundbite now from President Obama just moments ago, a very emotional President Obama making the case for this executive action. Let's take a listen.
Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara and from high schoolers at Columbine and from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day. So, all of us need to demand a Congress brave enough to stand up to the gun lobby's lies. All of us need to stand up and protect its citizens. All of us need to demand governors and legislators and businesses do their part to make our communities safer. We need the wide majority of responsible gun owners who grieve with us every time this happens and feel like your views are not being properly represented to join with us to demand something better.
That was President Obama making the case, not only talking about those 20 first graders at Sandy Hook who were killed, but on the streets of Chicago,
right,
where there is just gun violence on a daily basis. Caitlin, it's interesting, the Republicans, many of the Republicans, John Boehner, Ted Cruz, have called President Obama Emperor Obama. They've said that he's been conducting an imperial presidency by making or issuing some of these executive orders. But I'm looking at the 538 blog, Nate Silver's 538 blog, and President Obama, in fact, throughout history, has not issued the most number of executive orders. In fact, I'm looking here, this is up until October of 2014, 33 from President Obama, 38 from George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, 80. Let's look at some Republicans. 62 from Richard Nixon, John F. Kennedy, 75, Dwight Eisenhower, 60. So this is not unprecedented, as many Republicans have said it is.
Oh, sure. And the president has noted that. Democrats in Congress have noted that for a while now. But it doesn't really have an effect if you're talking about the voters who are turning out in Republican primaries. The two the two recent executive orders on immigration and now on guns happen to be really key issues in this on the Republican side of the race. And so you can present those facts for sure, but in terms of the movement on this, it's pretty, staid.
We heard the president say that, he's not there to debate the last mass shooting. He's trying to prevent the next one. Do you expect the talk of gun control among the Republican candidates to ramp up as we approach the primaries and the caucuses? How do you think his speech will affect them?
I think certainly this week we'll hear it. We already have heard it on the campaign trail from a variety of candidates. And I think we'll continue to see it through the primary. And I also think we'll continue to see Democrats push the other side of this issue. So I think we are setting it up for real debate in the general election on this issue. You saw a very impassioned president. This is someone who has addressed the public many, many times in his presidency, listing off those different shootings. But he also listed ones that happened during the Bush administration, and he's hinting, that this will inevitably happen again if we don't act. So I think he's trying to push that message as well, knowing that he has 1 year left and that his successor will also, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, confront these problems.
Caitlin, before we let you go, the president asked a rhetorical question during his comments. He said, how did this become a partisan issue? As somebody who covers politics on a regular basis, can you answer the president? How did this become a partisan issue when you had in the past Senator McCain proposing bills, Ronald Reagan talking about mandatory background checks? What is your take on that?
Well, I do think that politics now is more polarized than ever. I know we say that a lot, but also when you look at these districts, the way that they are structured, there really is not much appetite for stricter gun laws in these districts. And the way that they're carved out after the 2010 elections that put many Republicans in Congress, gave them control of the House, those districts are not likely to be changed anytime soon. And so I think the makeup in Congress is significant. So I think that's part of the issue.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns from Real Clear Politics. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.